Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Planning Skills webinar on local place plans. I'm Trevor Moffat, and I'm joined here today by Nick Wright from Wright Planning and Paul Nellis from the Scottish Community Development Centre. We're here today to talk about their research on developing a framework for the draft guidance for local place plans. The document was published on Monday the 27th of January, so very recent, and I hope you have the chance to read it in advance. We will be going through today a presentation by Paul and Nick, which will last approximately 30 minutes, and in the remaining time we will have a chance for a question and answer session. Thanks to those who have already sent in some questions on the registration page. We'll try to address those as best we can. If anything else you wish to ask appears throughout their presentation, please use your pop-up box on the right-hand side of your screen. You should have an option to type in any questions. You can also use that box if you have any issues with either video or audio that's appearing on your screen. I will try my best to resolve any issues for you as well. And I will now pass over to Nick and Paul to give the first part of the presentation.
Great, thanks very much, Trevor, and thanks to everyone for listening in. It's great there's so much interest. We'll take you through the main points of the report, and you'll get a download link by email afterwards in case you want to look through it in more detail. It's been about a year in gestation, this report, so some of you have probably been involved in some of the research process back at the start of last year and the seminar that we had in April last year. It's worth explaining very briefly at the start that this was commissioned by the Scottish Government, and it's one of the things, one of the bits of research they've commissioned to feed into the preparation of guidance and secondary legislation around how local place plans will work. They've said in their work programme that that will be published in the first quarter of 2021, so a year's time, and probably consultation about the draft guidance and secondary legislation before then. So this work is feeding into the Scottish Government's preparation of how to take local place plans forward. We'll keep emphasising throughout this is a model of how they could work, but we don't yet know if this is how they will work, and nobody will know until the first quarter of next year when the government says how they want them to work. So we are proposing a way that they could work for the Scottish Government, funded by them, but it's not certain it'll be like this yet. And anyone who says they know how local place plans will work doesn't know yet. There's a bit of a vacuum there. And a lot of the questions we've had can relate to that, but we'll come back to those later.
So this is Paul Nellis. One of the things important to say is that there are place plans out there in the community, going by all kinds of different names, community plans, place plans, all kinds of different names, and they will be part of the thinking about what the framework will look like and what the guidance will look like. So just so that you know that you will come across plans in the community, and they will become part of the draft guidance as well.
So let's take you through, first of all, the research questions that we were looking at. So there were three sets of questions that we were trying to resolve. One was about how do we better connect these different agendas of spatial planning and community empowerment. And these are all, these three agendas are really all part of legislation from the British government. So the things we were looking at were on the screen there. How can we align the different kinds of plans under those three agendas? How can we maximise community empowerment? And also, we'll come back to this later on, how can local place plans try to resolve equalities issues, which is a big thing for the Scottish Government. It's perhaps less talked about in planning, especially planning reform, but it's a big thing in terms of community empowerment and community agendas. So that was the first area. The second area was about what skills do planners, communities themselves, what do they need in order to make local place plans work? How do we work together? What resources will be required as well? I'll come back to that in a second. And how do we work together So those questions on the screen there. And then the third area we were looking at was resources. We all know, we're all worried about how many resources there will be, whether you're a planner in a local authority or if you're in a community. That's a concern. I'm sure the government is concerned as well about getting requests to do lots of local place plans and not having resources to do them, and also to deliver what comes out of the local place plans. Because the big criticism of charrettes in the past has been there's money to do the charrette, but not to deliver what comes out of the charrette. So how do we avoid that problem? So those are the 3 questions we looked at. Paul will take you through the process of how we went about the research.
Yes, so in terms of the kind of questions that we were looking at, and some of the things that we were talking to people about, we had a number of workshops across the country, and which led to a national seminar event. And within those processes, we talked about the fit with the other planning processes. How can local place plans fit with other planning processes in terms of local development plans or outcome improvement plans? Where were they going to interact? How were they going to inform each other? We also talked about local authorities and what support that needs to be in place for community groups to produce local plans. Very often plans are produced by local volunteers, and people who really want to see the best for the community. So what support needs to be in place in order to help them realise that? And there's plenty of examples across the country. What information do communities need to put their plans in place and have some leverage? The information might be, around about existing plans, what are the plans around about housing, other health information that needs to be made available. So, or within the local development plans, what do communities need to know in order to develop the plans? What resources are needed to support this? So, this process is not resource free. Communities need to think about where they can get the support from, where they can get resources, even right down to the very basics of meeting spaces, for communities to come together to have these conversations, or if it's a wider group, where they can actually present the research. All of that has resource implications and the support for communities to have access to that. And again, how does it fit with the other aspects of the Community Empowerment Act and Public Service Reform? So there's lots of things within Community Empowerment that we're starting to see with asset transfers, participation requests. So there really is a kind of balancing act in terms of having that knowledge and producing a plan based on that knowledge. In terms of research, we had a number of we started off with interviews with the Improvement Service, Planning Democracy, Scottish Community Alliance and SURF. So we had various sort of interviews. Planning Aid Scotland as well was part of that. We had focus groups right across the country, as I mentioned a wee bit earlier, East, North and South Ayrshire, Angus, West and East and Bartonshire, Scottish Government, Scottish Community Alliance and the Development Trust. So lots of focus groups so we can get some information about the kind of the key aspects that they're looking at. And then in April last year, we had a national seminar where planners came, and community organisations attended, and community planners themselves were there.
So we won't bore the pants off you by going through what everybody said. Not least actually because the vast majority of people we spoke to came up with one thing, which one of the civil servants actually in the Scottish Government focus group came up with this phrase, flipping the system, which will explain what that means. But almost everyone we spoke to saw the promise of local place plans as being a part of changing how we all work. To flip the system from being something like what you see now on the screen, which for the public, there's the kind of, I guess, the bastion of the community planning partnership in the middle, which produces all these plans around it, LDPs and locality plans and justice plans and all the other things, all the other plans that get produced by local authorities and their partners. And then out of that flows services and investments and cuts quite often and plans, and those things are bestowed on the public. Now, that's a perception, if you like, a simplification of how the current system would be perceived by many people outside. And the flipping the system is to go instead to a situation, I guess the kind of holy grail, if you like, where all those stakeholders, partners work together to produce plans and actions and services and investment. Everyone's in the room, both community planning partnership folk and also the local community in themselves. And in that situation, how things would work in that wonderful future is we would all start with the needs and aspirations of the community, not with we have to produce a plan. We would take account of representativeness and qualities, as you can see at the bottom there. The plans that we will produce would have a spatial expression of needs and aspiration, which is where we as town planners come in. It would be we had a good discussion at the Ayrshire focus group about plans needing to be a meeting of minds, so neither top down, but nor should they change completely straight away to bottom up, but they should be the community planning partnership and communities working together to produce a plan. So that's the future. And the role of local placement, I should say, that is couched entirely in terms of the current public service reform agenda. That's what that diagram seeks to describe. And local place plans, to come back to them, the role of them would be that they are that plan that's on the floor, they're in the middle of the room, they are the mechanism by which collaborative plans and service delivery and investments can be done. We'll explain that more in a second. So that's what we see as flipping the system. That would need what we heard from people involved on the ground in those interviews and focus groups and the seminar that Paul described. That would need resources, time and money, plus information, as Paul explained, amongst communities. It would need skills about how we work together, and it would need, from the community's point of view, it would need less bureaucracy. But actually, not just the community's point of view, that point was made by a lot of local authority planners and community planners as well, about having less onerous requirements to report back to government, for example, about what they're doing. So that last line, more trust, is as much about more trust from the government towards local authorities, as well as more trust between local authorities and community groups. So that's what flipping the system is, and that's what it will need, and that's the model on which the report, really, and its recommendations are based. Another risk of teaching us all to suck eggs, the benefits of that would be, as the government says in public services reform work, better planned services, more empowered communities, and working together to achieve more as a result of that. So how to make that happen? Well, we came up with a series of 10, rather than give lots of detailed guidance, there are lots of documents out there already that do that, which we can talk about later. We thought, let's just produce some simple guiding principles that the things that should happen to enable the system to be flipped. And there are 10 of those, which we'll spend a little bit of time talking through. So Paul will take the first 5.
Yep. In terms of those guiding principles, the first one and one of the key ones for us within the Scottish Community Development Centre is that it's community-led, that the community actually takes the lead with support from statutory sector and various sort of voluntary sector organisations within that community to actually, so the community take the lead to actually set the vision for their area and be directly involved in actually producing the community plan itself. And there will be recognition within that there are various other plans as well, like local place plans and other sort of agendas in the area. So that's where we see community planning partners and other key stakeholders being actively engaging with the community to produce an actual community-led plan. And you can imagine that within that support, that's where community planning partners might actually advise the community itself about what's within their plans and how the two plans can actually work together. So at that early stage, really important, a community vision and statutory partners being involved in discussions with the community on an equal level about setting a vision. Secondly, as many of you will appreciate, it's important to have inclusive and robust engagement. And that's within any local place plan, it's about thinking about those voices who maybe are not heard. That's the kind of the quality element. Thinking about getting as many views as possible about what the content and vision for that actual plan itself. And by robust, we mean going that actually having resources, the skills and knowledge in order to carry out an engagement process. And that might come from stakeholders and partners who will help advise the community itself. But there are great voluntary sector organisations who are completely embedded within communities, have a good idea about engagement and know how to get those less heard voices around the table. So it's not about a light touch, it really is about getting the whole community engaged in the actual process. As we said a wee bit earlier, it's about a clear vision and having key actions. And it's important within that is thinking about there may be within any plan there may be a spatial element, there may be services and resources element to that. So it's about actually what does that look like? What are the kind of key actions that statutory sector people need to take, and what does the community need to take responsibility for as well? It's not about developing a plan which just statutory sector or voluntary sector organisations can act on. It's about the community themselves being part of the actual the delivery mechanism for that. And then again, the timescales are really important as well. What are the kind of early actions that can happen? What are the easy ones? What are the ones that are a bit harder? They're going to take longer to actually produce. So really important to have clear actions and timescales about what needs to happen. And again, throughout all of this, it needs to be co-produced and co-delivered. Local community planning partners need to sit down with the community to think about how they can work with them in terms of producing a plan that will fit with others. For example, in East Ayrshire, we had heard how council workers were sitting down working with the community and ensuring that the Lloyd fits in with the community plan, and also one manager took on responsibility from ensuring that the community-led plan is actually reflected in things like the housing plan and other kind of service delivery plans. So really important that there's a co-production element to the actual production of the plan itself, and co-delivered as well. Everybody takes responsibility for the aspects of the plan that need to go forward, and again, there's going to have to be a clear outline of what's deliverable and when within the time scales how that can actually happen. And again, back to that kind of vision, it needs to reflect community aspirations. The plan needs to be really embedded in what the community see their future. So it's not limited to spatial planning. There will be aspects of service delivery within that other partners will actually have to take up. And so really important that that we don't just see community action plans as something which has a strong spatial element. There may well be spatial elements. For example, a community might have an aspiration about how to use a piece of land and to benefit their community. So there might be those kind of things within a plan, but very much it'll go right through the gamut of how a community wants to move forward. So there might be an employability aspect within the plan as well.
And we've got some examples a bit later on of different kinds of plan that are like local place plans that have already got that range of different proposals in, so we'll cover those a bit later on. Number 6, there were 2 or 3 questions sent in advance from a couple of participants around the relationship between local government plans and local place plans. And what we say in the report on page 20, I'll just read a bit of it out, is that the physical elements of a local place plan should have regard to the spatial strategy and policies within the LDP and, where relevant, the national planning framework. If the local community's vision for its future is at odds with the LDP, the local community and the planning authority should use the collaborative local place planning process as an opportunity for dialogue and to work together as equals to resolve any such differences. Local authorities should regard LPPs as material considerations and an opportunity to understand community aspirations and inform LDPs. So that's what we've suggested in the report. As I stressed earlier, whether that is actually what's implemented by the Scottish Government, we won't know for a year's time, but that's our suggestion to them, to try and navigate through that quite tricky issue, which I know is of interest to quite a lot of you. Number 7 on the list, support community empowerment and address inequality. We've talked about that quite a bit already earlier on, both Paul and I. Number 8, help community planning and land use planning achieve better outcomes. And that's really the idea that I alluded to earlier on in those diagrams of now and the future, flipping the system. But the local authorities and community planning partners, we're suggesting, should regard local place plans as statements of community aspirations, which they can use to better target services and decision making and investment to produce better outcomes for local communities. So that's what that's about. Number 9, local place boundaries should reflect local community boundaries. I guess we as planners all get maybe quite obsessed sometimes around what's the boundary of a plan. And I think for this it's quite simple. About local place plans should relate to a local community which local residents themselves identify as their community, which might be a village, it might be a small town, it might be an urban neighbourhood in a large town or a city. One of the examples later on is the pilot local place plan of the Foxbar in Paisley. Foxbar is about 8,000–9,000 people. Paisley is about 10 times that size. I don't think a local place plan will work for Paisley, but it's probably okay for Foxbar. So that's just an example. And then number 10, finally, as Paul has said, there have been lots of community action plans produced around the country over the last 10–15 years by lots of different people, some by communities themselves, some by SCDC or PAS or consultants working with communities. There's been lots of funding around from the Coalfields campaign, for example, and wind farms in order to pay for those things. I didn't realise they existed until I started doing them 3 or 4 years ago. And I kind of wonder how many other working in the planning profession, how many others don't realise they exist. They're actually very similar to local place plans. They can be one and the same thing. The point is, as Paul said, there's lots of experience out there already. So, on to the next slide. As I said earlier, we're not going to give lots of detailed guidance about how to produce a local place plan. There is lots of information out there already about how they might be prepared. For example, PAS produced a very useful guide a couple of weeks ago on their website about their approach to producing what they hope a local place plan might be like. So there's a lot of detail in that that's very useful and informative. What we thought would be useful for us to do is, rather than get into detail, would be just to be quite simple about the process and give some examples. So the process, this simple diagram basically just shows a local place plan might be initiated by community, that's the preference, or if a local authority feels that it would be helpful for some communities to have a local place plan, for example, to tackle inequalities or to help empowerment in that community, they might try to initiate that process. Foxbar was an example of that later on. Needs careful thought and work, but could start from either place. And then process, most importantly, should be co-produced, as Paul has stressed, and it should be cyclical. So you get going, you prepare the plan with loss of engagement, those 10 principles we described. Delivery, number 3, making it happen, is fundamental, because any plan is only as good as the delivery, really. But then you get going again, and you review the plan, refresh it. It's a cyclical thing. So that's the basic process, and we can talk more about the detail if we need to. There's more in the report. What might a local place plan look like? To try to illustrate that, well, we've got 4 or 5 examples. We might not talk through all of them, but the first one is a community action plan in Cumnock, which Paul knows more about.
Yeah. And actually, this is a good example of what Nick had just presented there, that East Ayrshire Council's got an ambition that every community, every village will actually have a community plan, and I've been going about that task quite adamantly for the last couple of years. And some communities within East Ayrshire are onto the second cycle of the plan. They had a 5-year plan and are now revisiting that. One example is in Cumnock, where community activists came together to look to see how they could produce an action plan. I think Cora were in the area and supported the community with a development worker who's essentially a community development worker who helped bring the community together, all the various sort of groups that are active within the community, to work on a community plan. And again, there were 6 main themes within that plan around about outdoor activities, the local economy, better town appearance, community facilities, activities and events, tourism, history and heritage, and services. And actually, this is a really good example of the variety of things that the community are interested in when they're bringing their vision together. And it's not, as we said earlier, all about spatial planning. That's just one component of these plans, but there is a spatial element. And some of the learning from Cumnock is really important. One being that there's a need for financial support to realise these plans. What the community, the activists talked about was some sort of community chest in order to, produce the outcomes and actions that they desire through the plan. One of the other things is a role for spatial planners to be involved in the process, and this was really important because they did have spatial aspirations, and again, what they said to us was it would have been really useful to have a spatial planner involved in the development process, so that they didn't develop something that's way off kilter, that in terms of the local development plan, that might actually clash with that. So lots of important things come out from that. And again, right down to the very basics of the need for meeting spaces for the community to come together to have these conversations was really important.
And what East Ayrshire have also done to support that kind of wider programme that Paul described for producing these in each community is they've produced some really interesting guidance, which you can get from the planners in East Ayrshire, which gives guidance to their communities about how to go around producing these placemaking plans. It gives a rough idea of a process spread over 6 months, and there's a draft example in there, this happens to be Catherine, of what the ultimate placemaking plan might look like. Now, they're called placemaking plans. We don't know for certain yet that they will be the same as local place plans, as we've described earlier on, but they're a very good model for how local place plans could be that fits with the kind of thing that we've been describing over the last half an hour. Another one is Buckhaven, which again Paul knows a bit more about than I do.
Yeah, and again, this came from quite an extensive charrette process within Buckhaven itself. I think Planning Aid Scotland were involved in this process, and again, it was about thinking about the identity of the town centre itself. There was lots of really good community engagement that took place, and with schools, with residents, thinking about how they can, what a plan might look like. So a lot they discussed movement through the town, access to transport, what and how to use the force roads, a kind of big issue. One of the key groups within this was an environmental project, so there was lots of stuff there about the environment within Buckhaven and making a sustainable environment, so that it was visually appealing and kind of varied biodiversity within the actual area itself, and a lot about community interactions itself. One of the big issues that we see within communities is lots of responsibility falling on the shoulders of a small number of volunteers. So we often see communities saying, well, how can we actually build up our volunteer base? So lots of stuff there, and that action plan is right up to 2023. So it'll be interesting to see how it develops over the next couple of years.
And you can see more about Buckhaven in the report, and there's a link in there as well to the plan. And at the same for Foxbar as well, there's a link to this in the report. I'm not going to say much about this because I should declare an interest. I was involved in doing this, and I don't want to talk about it too much because I'll end up talking too much. And the aim is not to promote this as being wonderful at all. This was a pilot which was funded by the government, and Renfrewshire Council were behind this, working with the local community council. There are 2 or 3 key learning points I'll come out in a second, but these are just some extracts from the report, and there's a link to that report in our report, if you look through that on page 27. So we explain the process there. Out of that came 9 priorities, which the community decided through a facilitated approach. Only a couple of those were actually linked with spatial planning. One about improving the local park, one about using vacant sites for housing. But the rest of them were things like the what's on directory, make sure we get the gala day up and running again, things like that. So a lot of these weren't spatial planning things, but they were community priorities. The plan does have a spatial diagram, as you would expect a local place plan to have, we hope. And then there's a project sheet, if you like, about how to take each project forward with some examples. What's worth saying is that one of the bits of learning for that was that it can take a few months. In the case of Foxbar, it took up to a year to get that community ready to prepare that local place plan. The council were the people who started it, but they started it by the community planners and the spatial planners speaking to the community council and getting them ready to go about preparing a plan. Now, the community council there was fertile ground, if you like. They were very keen to work with the council to do it, so things worked very well. But that, even in a good case like that, that took a few months to get to the point of starting to prepare the plan. That only takes a few months. But the delivery could take anything up to 10 years, potentially. Some quick wins, possibly, but some of the bigger projects have to take a long time. So that's Foxbar. And then the final example, which isn't in the report, but I thought was worth adding in, is Sustainable Dunbar, who are a community group, produced this action plan. A bit like Cumnock, they've gone through 2 cycles. So this is the second version you can see on the screen. And what's interesting about this is that the topics it includes, sorry about the pub empties outside, the topics it covers are not, some of them aren't very, on the topics you get on LDP, so food vision, energy vision, you might get transport on an LDP, about enterprise, about health. Those were their topics that they produce, absolutely fine, that's what's important to them. And I've just picked a couple of the mini plans they had for each of those topics. And I don't know if you can read that on the screen, but the bits that are highlighted are the bits where planners might help to assist those through statutory planning work or through our skills. So establishing and supporting community gardens, working to expand allotment provision, developing local food hubs. Now, even those might seem a bit tangential. The other things on there, like analysing local capacity to meet local food needs, or run programme of awareness and raising events, Those things aren't planning at all, but planning does have a role in some of the things. You can see the same on the energy action plan here. There's a couple of actions in there which are planning related, and the rest of them are about education and skills and finance. But we as planners have a role as part of a bigger thing there. So that illustrates some of the points from earlier on. We're nearly at the end, but before we get to it, there were a few questions about resources to plan and resources to deliver.
Yeah.
So, Paul.
And I think that one of the kind of key points within that is actually having information, expertise, and funding in order to deliver these plans. And they could be sourced through partners or independent support. For example, SCDC, but there are other agencies or organisations available. But the important point about that is that by equipping local communities, you're actually getting them to buy into the plan. You're actually getting, they own the plan, they have ownership for it. So it really is an important exercise. And the big element of that is about building the capacity, their skills, knowledge, and expertise around about the process of developing and delivering the plan. There are aspects of it, the community effect, local government affects everything in terms of communities and decision making. So local authorities therefore have a key role in helping to prepare these local place plans. And again, that, as we said before, will take resources and personnel to kind of support the process. Although having said that, there's no one model within that. As I said in Cumnock, Cora provided a worker who worked very closely with the local authority to bring the community together to produce the plan. So there's no one element there, yet no one way to produce a local place plan. And I'm sure a lot of you are aware of the kind of charrette process that's been happening across Scotland as well, where there's support to develop plans, albeit a heavy spatial element within that. One of the very important areas and an objective for the Scottish Government is around about tackling inequality and thinking about who is not represented around the table, thinking about those less heard voices, whether it's mothers who, young mothers who maybe want to have a say in terms of what their community is going to look like for the children growing up, whether it's the BME community or Gypsy Traveller community. It's important to think about these groups having an input into the plan, and that's not resource free. That can sometimes take resources to get people around the table. Whether it's people with disabilities, then you need to be thinking about accessible venues. If it's about people that English is their second language, then you need to think about translators there. It's really important to think about not just the people it's easy to get around the table, but actually having a wide representation at a local level. Okay, so yes, really important about tackling inequality and building the capacity of groups to be involved.
So you'll see, just to wrap up, that slide there that's in front of you, that's an extract from the recommendations in the report. There are some other recommendations about what other work is needed around guidance and that kind of thing, and around skills and capacity, which we won't go into now. You can see them in the report. And the report also has some sources of further information and support as well, which are already available from PAS and SCDC, DTAS and others as well. Again, we'd stress that we don't yet know if what we've described in the presentation is what will come to pass, but it feeds into the process that the government are doing to prepare the secondary legislation and the guidance over the next year. So I think, sorry, we've taken longer than thought, but that's the end of the presentation, and Trevor's now going to guide us through some questions we've received, I think.
Okay, just to reiterate what you said earlier on, if people missed the start of the presentation, if you want to ask any questions live, you can use the box on the right-hand side of your screen saying questions. We're already seeing quite a few, and we had quite a few earlier on from the registration sheet. I will go to our initially asked questions. We have covered a lot through the presentation itself, but There's a few we want to pick up on a little bit more. I was going to ask a question as a planning authority, what would be the best way to go about inviting the community to discuss whether they want a local place plan or not?
That's a good question. I think as a planning authority, it's worthwhile finding out what's happening within that community at the moment. It might not be the planning authority's role to ask the community. It may well be that, for example, in East Ayrshire, they have an ambition and a vision to have all the towns and villages having their own plan. So it'd be worthwhile finding out what's actually happening already. Is there a desire within the community to produce their own plan? How are you going to build up the capacity to make that happen? So I would say the first step is really just to kind of find out more about the community, if there's a plan that needs to be renewed, or if there's a desire there within the community to have a plan, or if the local authority itself is maybe looking to produce a local plan in every area. Then I would say that's just a bit of initial research to find out what's happening.
And if the town planners, if you don't know or don't have contacts in those communities, quite often your colleagues in community learning and development might do. For example, North Ayrshire and Dundee and Fife, they and other authorities, the planners will go to the communities through their colleagues in CLD because they have very good relationships. So that's worth knowing as well.
Yeah. And really just on the next point there, if there is a good community learning and development team within it, they will have the knowledge about what's happening on the ground and the feasibility of the plans if they're not there already.
Okay. Our second question kind of roughly falls along the same theme of how plans will be prepared. Someone is wanting to understand how community bodies will identify land and buildings of particular significance to the local area, and how to address these in the plans.
Well, one example from experience is did some work in Haddington a few years ago now, which was for the community. A consortium of community groups came together because they were concerned about what was happening to their town centre, not least the one-way system that was being visited upon them by the council. And that led to the production of a vision and an action plan for the town centre. It was effectively a local place plan, if you like. And during the engagement, so during the period of asking people what did they want for their town centre, residents, businesses, community groups, during those discussions, 2 or 3 buildings came up constantly as being, we want that building back in use. One was an old hotel, one was a building which was a shop on the high street that had been recently vacated. So there were 2 or 3 buildings which people kept on mentioning as particularly critical for the town. Almost, I can't think of the right word, but they were landmark buildings, they were prominent, and they were almost like touchstones, which the community, if we fix those, then it shows that we've turned the corner. So for me personally, I think those buildings will come out during consultation if the questions are open about what concerns people.
And another point on that is that the Community Empowerment Act has significantly beefed up the the ability for communities to be involved in asset transfer. So I'm sure within any local authority they will have the knowledge of what buildings the community are interested in or have expressed an interest in. So I think that information will be there, and there's plenty of examples where communities are now in the process of trying to get involved in asset transfers. So there will be knowledge within the local authority about buildings of interest.
Okay. Going back along the same kind of theme of preparation, we touched earlier on about the size of plans. You talked about Foxbar. What would limit the size of a community of interest when we're looking at the preparation of these plans?
Well, that is interesting because we talk about local place plans, and actually there are communities within communities, and whether it might be BME community or people with disabilities who want to want to have a plan for how their town is going to work for them as well. So I suspect that what we will see in the future is not just what we call place plans with geographic boundaries, but there will be thematic plans, in terms of how, disability access, the BME community about how they want to use resources within their community. So there will be, if it's a good community plan, then the thematic elements will actually hopefully be reflected within that. But actually, I don't see any issue with communities of interest actually having their own plan as well, which might have a spatial element within that. I don't know if some of you work with Glasgow Disability Alliance, if that was, they were looking at space for people with disabilities and how the streetscape could be transformed.
Yeah. I guess the thing I've learned over the last couple of years is just what you've been describing, Paul, so Paul is from the community development world, and I hadn't appreciated quite so much until the last couple of years just how many organisations there are out there, like the Glasgow Disability Alliance, for example, in Glasgow, who represent all forms of disability and have a huge amount of expertise and knowledge, which they're very keen to work with people like planners in order to make things better. That's just a really valuable learning point for me personally, to work with these folk. So.
We've got a couple of questions from the audience live. We looking to for the local authorities how to actively reflect the wants of our community and not be a particular part. Has been asked several times here. There's kind of the age-old dilemma of some people being overrepresented in the preparation of these plans, and how to avoid that as best possible.
Well, one of the things in mind is for any of you who've looked through the recent report that PAS produced over the last couple of weeks about local place plans, then the approach that PAS put forward for local place plans, and others have as well, for community action plans, they suggest, to get around that issue, they suggest doing a community survey as a part of the engagement. Now, that's not the only way of doing it, but that's one very good way of making sure that you don't just rely on the people who might come to a meeting, but you get further beyond those. Now, a survey doesn't always work. It's one way of doing it. You need to promote it very well and get it out there, get a good response rate. There are other ways of doing it as well. For example, I was working in Kilwinning over the last year, and we've had very low turnout at events that we've organised, but we've had very high turnout to the stuff we've done online. So more so than anywhere else I've worked. So we might only have had, at one event we had 4 or 5 people come along, but putting similar information online on a specially constructed website, we had several hundred responses. So there's something around using online and social media as well. So there's a couple of different ways. I guess it's just make sure you have lots of different ways of getting communities.
And what the thing I would strongly point people towards is the national standards for community engagement. And within the national standards, which are the Scottish Government's standards for good quality engagement, it talks about trying to get beyond the loudest voices within the community. We're making that extra effort to think about, well, who's excluded here? Who do we need to work and do a bit of extra work in order to get to them? And very often the community itself will know who those excluded groups are, and will actually, there'll be mechanisms in which you can get them to the fore and work with them in terms of planning itself. There are lots of methods out there as well. A piece of work that we were involved in a number of years ago was actually getting to see who were the leaders within communities who were excluded, and working with them in order to bring that group forward, or to be the voice for that group, as long as they were working with them closely. So there are lots of ways there. But one of the things that we need to be aware is that it's not resource free. You might need to put extra resources in to get excluded communities to come forward. Whether that's maybe Gypsy and Traveller community coming forward. How do you make that happen? Very often, people often hear in our sector say, "Oh, they're hard to reach," but they're not actually the hard to reach. They just need to be reached, and they're often working with third sector organisations. So actually, it's working maybe through the third sector and thinking about how do we get them to come forward and work with them, build the capacity to be involved in plans.
Okay, just kind of moving on from that aspect, we do have quite a mix of spatial planners and community plan liaison officers in our audience here today. Probably one of the questions we should address is how can we link local place plans with community plans and LPPs as well? I don't know your thoughts on that.
My feeling is that it has to start at the beginning. The people who are responsible for LPPs and the development plan need to be working with the community if they're producing a place plan, if only just to guide them through what the development plan says or what the LPP says, and actually how that place plan can fit snugly within that. Where that's not possible, for example, in East Ayrshire, a senior manager has been, taking forward what the place plan is actually saying and reflecting that to partners within the LPP, and also within the housing plan for that particular area. So she's made it her responsibility to ensure that place plan is reflected in all those other plans that are happening. I mean, I accept, like everyone, like all of you out there, there's so many plans, so many levels, it can become quite mind-boggling, but we just need to kind of focus on the priority that the community have in this, and as Nick had said, flipping the system is going to be hopefully the way that we go forward.
And I think there's lots of good examples, the ones that spring to mind, as well as the ones that Paul's mentioned, East Ayrshire, Fife, and Western Berkshire, and South Ayrshire, and North Ayrshire, and others as well. They are all doing, in different ways in each place, but they're all doing what Paul has described. So many of you listening to this are probably already doing what Paul has described. And if you aren't, then there'll be a colleague in a nearby authority who is doing it. So I think there's plenty of expertise out there already.
Yeah, I've got another question kind of leading on from that. Someone's asking if there's already community plans, action plans in existence, should they be considering refreshing these into local place plans to perhaps address that flipping system method?
Well, my personal view is that we shouldn't be asking communities to do more work just for the sake of it. So if there's a perfectly acceptable community action plan that we can work with, we don't know yet what local place plans will have to be like, but if a community action plan for Cumnock, for example, is almost the same as what we're told local place plans have to be like next year, then we should just use that. We shouldn't get hidebound by what the words on the cover are, because it's unfair basically to expect a community to volunteer a whole load of its time just to change the words on the cover to suit us.
Yeah, and just reflecting on what Nick has said there, there's been a lot of time, sweat, and tears going into these plans already, and they just don't. It's not just a spatial element that they have. There's lots about employability, about environment, and about how they bend services to be more suitable to their community. So I don't see the need to revamp it if the community are not ready to revamp it. I just think for planners in terms of spatial planning, we need to just think, well, what elements of that impact on our plans, and what do we need to do? What conversations do we need to have with the community? For example, in Cumnock, and within their plan, which is quite wide-ranging, there's the spatial elements amount to a piece of land that's just on the outskirts of the community, and an orchard, which is just in the centre of the community, and its use and how it can benefit the community. So for me, it's fairly straightforward for planners at the minute, to identify those issues and work with the community to realise their vision.
Okay, we have a lot of questions coming in. I'm not sure we'll be able to address everything that's been asked today, and we'll need to think about a method, perhaps a kind of frequently asked questions sheet on the back of this to address the amount of things coming in. Leading on from the last section, the relationships with community planning and spatial planning, what differences do you see local place plans making to communities through the research?
Well, if local place plans if they work to flip the system as we've described in this, if that's what happens, then they will have a huge effect on communities, because they could help to, at various levels, they could help to rebuild trust between communities and local authorities, which we know from Scottish Government research is not high. They could empower communities to do more things. They could help local authorities deliver services and invest in ways which benefit communities directly. So that there are lots of benefits. That's quite a general answer, but I think, yeah.
And again, on that point, the benefits for the statutory sector is that you've got an active community who are working towards a plan to actually improve their community and their space. So you're building up skills and confidence of the community to be involved in this kind of work. You've got activists who are a workforce in themselves in order to kind of realise the ambitions and visions for the community. So where we're seeing staff disappear from local authorities, and we're seeing many agencies that don't have the workers that they had in the past, you've got communities taking up the mantle of what's important to them and working towards that and helping to influence the service redesign as well. So I think that the benefits are huge, and having talked about in terms of local democracy and people feeling that they're part of the community, that they have a say in what's important to them. So yeah, it's huge, and who knows better about their own community than the community themselves. So it's important that we see them on an equal footing, and again, there'll be plans that are better. Some plans will be better than others, but if they've been developed by the community, we should respect that and think about how we can actually work with the community, because you're going to get more bang for your buck essentially with it when the community is on board.
Okay, thank you very much, both Paul and Nick. Unfortunately, we're coming to the end of our time today, and just got a few bits of housekeeping to go through with you before we close off. Thanks to everyone for sending in the questions. We received a lot, which is very positive, and we'll do our best to address these afterwards.
Can I just jump in? Sorry, can I just jump in? The questions are, even the ones we haven't answered, they're really valuable for the government to hear, and I think they'll be interested in seeing them. So we'll collect them all up, and we'll make sure the government get them, because it will help them understand what the concerns are amongst planners, and the aspirations, I guess, as well, amongst community planners, to help them work out how they draft up the guidance and legislation. So it's all really helpful.
Okay, thank you. Just to let you know that the slides and presentation will be available through the IS website, and a link to the paper will also be put out there. I shall draft up an email next week when this is all available and send it out to all the sign-ins, and it would be very much appreciated if you could share this with colleagues, just so they're aware of that this has went on, and it could be valuable information in it for them. And as well as that, I'll send out contact details for SCDC and Nick Wright if you want to follow up anything in more detail. Just to let you know, our next Planning Skills webinar will be looking at place and health, and that will be on the 25th of February. I'll also include that in the link to come out, the email to come out next week. And a final point is, we will, as you close off today, you'll get a pop-up with a short questionnaire, just looking for some feedback on this webinar, and potentially ideas for anything we can cover in future, whether it's related to local place plans or anything else. And just to say thank you from me, and thank you to everyone that tuned in.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll just be closing up now. Thank you very much.